What is a joint venture agreement and when should it be used? So I see in practice a lot of joint venture agreements. I see people using joint venture agreements, and sometimes they're used correctly, sometimes they're not used the right way. So basically, a joint venture agreement is a partnership agreement. It's basically two or more parties coming together and agreeing that they're going to enter into some venture, i.e., a joint venture, some project, some investment together. And that joint venture agreement then basically defines the relationship of the parties, provides certain mechanisms as far as how the parties are going to be compensated, when they're going to be compensated, who's going to maybe maintain the books and records of the property if it's a real estate venture, who's going to maintain the bank account for the joint venture, who's going to uh, manage the property if it's real estate. So there's a number of things that it's going to do. It'll define when the property, if it's real estate, when it can be sold, how it can be sold, how the profits of the sale are or proceeds of the sale are split and paid out. So it does all of that, but it basically is a partnership agreement. Now, a joint venture agreement is properly used in the scenario where you have in real estate. So if it's a real estate investment where two parties are saying, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to buy this property together, and we're going to either fix and flip it, we're going to um, hold it as a rental, or whatever the case may be. This is going to be an investment, and we're going to go in together and we're going to purchase this property. The proper way to structure that transaction is to have both parties take ownership of the property as tenants in common based upon the percentage of you know uh, their partnership interest. So if one party is putting up and going to invest 75% of the funds and the other party is going to do 25%, or whatever the arrangement is as far as who's going to receive what percentage of the partnership, the property should be titled in the name of those parties and reflect on the deed that percentage of ownership. So ABC LLC would own 75% and XYZ LLC would own the other 25%, or maybe they do 50-50, but they would be on title for that amount. Then you would have your joint venture agreement that further defines the parties' relationships other than just being joint owners of real estate. It will then, go into more detail as to how these owners are going to act with respect to each other and act with respect to the real estate. And that then controls their relationship going forward. A joint venture agreement should not be utilized whereby you have some silent partner that's not on the property, that's not on title to the property. That's really not what a joint venture agreement should be used for. If it is going to be used for that purpose, and you're going to have, a passive investor and somebody coming on, it's almost like what Paul Vincent said in our intro, like you can't just JV it and avoid securities rules and regulations and things like that. In that case, if you're going to do something like that with a joint venture agreement and one party is going to take 100% ownership of the property, and then you have this silent partner that's in the background that is just investing, in that case, you have to make sure that it's, if you are going to do a joint venture agreement in that scenario, you have to make sure it complies with all the securities laws and things like that. And in that case, you need to seek the counsel of a securities attorney. But otherwise, really, the joint venture agreement is properly used where the parties are on title to the property, and it just further defines their relationship. I frankly prefer that the parties in that scenario just do form an LLC for the purposes of acquiring the property and have a formal operating agreement. But sometimes they just like the joint venture, agreement. They like being on title for various reasons. And in that case, yeah, as long as both parties are on title, you can do that joint venture agreement to define their relationship.
I find that it's sometimes hard, Sean, to envision a situation where a joint venture agreement is appropriate for anything other than just kind of a typical one-off partnership. Two LLCs are like, hey, I like what you've done and you bring some value over here. Let's just get together and do this flip or do this one thing and see how it works out. And we can just partner without all the formalities of
Right.
maybe the long-term formalities of an LLC. But beyond that, it's just hard to imagine a scenario where you're not just doing a limited liability company.
Yeah, I wouldn't enter into a joint venture agreement for anything other than what you're describing, which is, hey, this is going to be just a one-off scenario. Or maybe, hey, look, you and I have never invested together, and instead of going through, all the fees and costs of putting an LLC in place and doing an operating agreement and whatnot. Let's just joint venture. We'll both go on title to the property, see how we work together. And then maybe if we decide, hey, this works out and we want to do other real estate, then maybe at that point we go and set up a whole structure involving, the two of us and that type of thing. So it's, maybe good to just kind of test the waters of a relationship, more of a dating or engagement type scenario versus a marriage, if you will. And it might work well for that. But yeah, I wouldn't do tons of business using just a joint venture agreement. It's really, in my view, designed for just that one-off scenario where it's, you don't have to go through the process of LLC formation and operating agreements and that type of thing. And you can just use it for that quick, let's just get on title, let's buy this property and define our relationship that way.